Okay, so I'm doing this video at the request of somebody on the Arrma forums who wanted to know how much oil goes into the shocks. So what I've done is pulled the rear shocks off my Fury. First thing you need to do is obviously get them cleaned up. You can tell when the shocks are out of oil because they're very springy. So you see they're super bouncy, super springy. This one's got more gush to it than this one, although it's more of a feel thing than probably a see thing. There's still some oil in these, but they're really pretty springy. So that's how you can tell when they're out. So the first thing you need to do after you get them off the truck is get them cleaned up a bit. And you want to do a visual inspection to see if there's any gunk buildup. So there are three places to look. The first place is in the spring retainer cup. So you got to get that off. So you pull that spring up, push up on the bottom of the shock shaft, and you should be able to pop the spring retainer cup off. And then give it a look and see how much gunky dirt has built up on the shock or the spring retainer cap. And get a little toothbrush. I like to use a kitty toothbrush because they're a little bit smaller head and you can reach into places. I also prefer the kind that have only bristles and none of those little fancy rubber whitening bits on the toothbrush. And then just clean it off. So this had a little bit, but not a tremendous amount. I just got done running this at the skate park, and so there's a fair amount of dried grass. And then set the spring cup aside, pull the shock spring off. Sometimes you'll get this collar that come along with the shock, so you just want to clean that off, paying attention if there's any goopy dirt on this as well. The goopy dirt is an indicator that there's oil leakage. So I usually get maybe a bigger brush like this just to brush off the spring to make it nice and clean. And I will set it over there. So there's one, and then we'll do the other. We pop the tensioners off. Oh, so here, I'm not sure if you can see, but there's actually liquid oil. I've got the large and the small spacer, and there's actually liquid oil in between the two, which is a sure indication of leakage. So I'm going to clean those up. Get that cleaned up. Get this one cleaned up. And I didn't pull the spacers off that first one. So we'll take a look between them. No, but there is some gunky dirt on there. So we'll go ahead and clean all that off. So it looks like there's some leakage of oil around the cap of the shock. That's where the oil will come to on these spacers, is from the cap. And if you look, I'm going to get up, see if I can show you. You can actually see the liquid oil on the shock, if this will focus. Nope, I guess the focus is fixed. Well, that's no good. So hopefully you can see down here that there's definitely some liquid on the shock body. So we'll just go ahead and brush that off. The other place you want to look is here on the lower portion of the shock body where the seals go in for the shock shaft. As you can see, there's also some crusty dirt, which is an indicator that there's leakage around these seals here or the seals here where the shock shaft goes in. So usually you'll get indicators of leaking oil in those three places. The shock cap here at the bottom of the shock shaft, here up here at the top of the shock shaft, or here where the cap goes onto the shock body. So some companies have different design shocks. This one, they're just okay. These shocks aren't fantastic. So I'll go ahead and there's a lot more gunk on this lower shock body. So we'll try to get that cleaned up. Try to do it as fast as I can. There's a ton. You can see there's grass there too, but there's definitely a fair amount of crusty dirt. So I believe that this shock here is leaking more than the other. Pull the spring off, give it a good cleaning. This is just a 2-inch cheapy paintbrush from Home Depot. The bristles are kind of stiff, which is good. We pull the collar off, And there's also liquid oil on this collar. Get it all cleaned up. And like the other shock, there's liquid oil here on the shock body that was getting trapped under the spring collars. And there's chunky dirt here. So this is an indicator that if these are good shocks, they should be rebuilt. O-rings should be redone. O-rings should be sealed up using some green slime or similar. But Arrma shocks are crap. Sorry, Arrma, but they are. And Arrma doesn't offer an upgrade shock. And Arrma uses a jacked up shock size. So you really can't upgrade the Arrma shocks super effectively. There are obviously some mods out there that you can do. The best shocks that I've seen that are as close to an exact fit as possible are the Intigi MSR 11s. I'm not running them on this right now because I don't have them for the fronts. I've only got them for the rear and I like the shocks to match. So here we go. So now to fill these up. So the first thing you're going to need to do is have some place to pour the oil. So get yourself a paper towel. This is just a shop towel. They're a little bit, they don't fiber up as much. You want to unscrew the cap. Set the cap to the side and then pour the shock oil out. So as you can see, the shock oil isn't nice and yellow as it was when it went in. I'd used 400 CST Tamiya oil because, quite frankly, I have a ton of it. And 400 CST seems to be a good choice. A lot of people will quote weights. I don't particularly care to use weight nomenclature when I'm talking about shock oil because it will vary. For example, Losi 30 weight is thinner than Associated 30 weight, so it's a non-constant value, where CST is a constant value. So I usually run 350 or 400 CST in the truck. I tend to run the backs a little bit softer than the fronts, so I tend to run about 50 CST difference between the two. So you're not going to probably be able to see this, but inside the cap is a rubber O-ring. It's a little bit easier to see on the shocks that are the black. You got a red cap, the red O-ring, and it's hard to see. You want to inspect that, visually inspect it to see if there's any warping, bubbling, or tears in that O-ring, and this one appears to be pretty solid, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it. I have tried green slime, I've tried some 110% sweat grease on the O-rings. Nothing seems to keep these things from leaking, so I've basically given up and just know that they're going to leak. So there's that one. We'll go ahead and pour out the second one. Put the cap to the side, pull the oil out. Same situation. Not all shock oils are colored. Losi is colored, Tamiya is colored, Associated is clear, and much more is clear. The advantage is either direction. With clear, you have a better indication of how much dirt is getting inside of your shock body by the color of the oil. However, with colored oil, they're color keyed to the thickness, the viscosity. So it's a little bit easier to know what you put in. I mean, I poured that out, and although it's grubby, I know it's yellow, which means it was Tamiya 400. So I'm going to just check the tightness on the bottoms here. Bottoms are tight. We got our shock tower, sand. I'm going to put our shocks in here, and I'm going to go ahead and use some Associated 350 CST. I'm nearly out, so I kind of want to just get rid of the bottle. 350, 400 is about what I run in the back. It's winter time right now, so I'm going a little bit lighter than what was in there. Last time I built these up, it was summertime. So it's best if you can do a long, even squeeze rather than squeeze, squeeze, to reduce the amount of air that you're introducing. The more times you let up on the bottle, it'll suck air in. So you want to fill them up so that the oil is domed like this. I didn't quite put enough in there, although it's perfectly even. You can push the inner shock piston up and down to release any air that may got trapped underneath the piston, because I filled them up with the piston at the bottom. Some people fill them up with the piston like a quarter of the way up from the bottom. So there's all sorts of different ways. There are many different ways to build shocks as there are people. So I pulled the piston all the way down, and I'll notice that there's only a tiny couple of air bubbles coming up on this left one, and there's really nothing coming up on this right one. So I usually give it a little tap to pop the bubbles once they hit the surface, and then cap it up so that it domes. All right, so if these were diaphragm shocks, you would just take a hex driver or something, swipe off the top so that there's no dome, and then drop the diaphragm on, and then screw the cap on, if these were diaphragm shocks. However, these are not. Usually an aeration shock will have a hole drilled in the cap somewheres, and that hole is to allow for excess oil as you're screwing the cap down on to come out. But these aren't built that way neither. Like I said, these Arrma shocks are kind of a peculiarity. I'm going to move this off to the side. So what you do is you get your paper towel and hold it. You want to make sure that you're not holding it in a way that will restrict the piston movement. And some people will fill the cap. If these are better shocks, I probably would put some oil in the cap, but there's more than enough here. So I'm going to go ahead and put the cap on. I'm only going to tighten it down about halfway. And then I'm going to push down on the shock slowly and allow any oil to escape. You can hardly see it, but there's some oil there. And then I tighten this down all the way. You can see how much oil escaped. So if I had gone and put more oil in the cap the way I would have with the proper shock, more just would have escaped, and it wouldn't have made any difference. All it was is wasting oil. Like I said, I'm not a huge fan of these shocks. I think they're pretty cheap. So that's a basic build. So what you want to be able to do is the shock should be able to compress all the way, and then they'll rebound. So this one's got a ton of rebound, which is good, right? So that's good. If you can't push the shock all the way in, that's as far as it'll go, no matter how hard you push, right? So you've packed to the point where the oil can no longer compress. All right, so this is really nice, actually. Maybe one of the best builds that I've got. Usually they only rebound about half that way. So we'll go ahead and grab the second shock here, and we'll repeat with putting the cap on about halfway. And use a different paper towel. And we'll just wrap it around, making sure that the shock travel isn't interfered with. We'll slowly push down. Oh, that went too smoothly. I don't think this one's going to work out quite as well. Well, I got more shock oil out though, so maybe it'll be fine. All right, and then we'll give it a little push. Aha. Okay, so now here's the tricky part. This is the part that is the most difficult in tuning your shocks. Is you want the rebound to be exactly the same. Otherwise, one side of the vehicle is going to have more shock dampening than the other. So you want to hold them. There are tools for this. Losi makes it. RPM makes it. But we're not racing. It's not a big deal. Maybe this will have a bit better. Maybe it'll seal a little better against the blue. Okay. So we're gonna push in and release. Okay? Usually it's a little bit easier to do it like this. Push and release. So the one on the right has just got a tiny bit more rebound, and as I push down on the one on the right compared to the one on the left, when I do them simultaneously, I can feel that the one on the right is just a little bit more, but again, it's not a race rig, so we're good. For a basher, this is plenty good, because I'm going to have to redo them again after the next run, because these things leak like a freaking sieve. Make sure that the caps are all the way tight, because sometimes they don't want to tighten up. Okay, good. Good. All right, and that's it. That's how, and then you just reverse putting the shock back together again. So that there is how you refill the Arrma shocks.